So, have you been affected by this ongoing trend in the financial services industry? You know the trend that we're talking about. It's this constant conversation, whether you see in the ads or in print or on radio or on the internet or on television, that says, if you've got $500,000, we want to talk to you. Well, did you ever stop and think about, well, what if I don't have 500,000? What if I'm just starting out? And here's the statistics on it. When you look at younger generations, whether it be the millennials or the Gen Xers, they're behind schedule in terms of where they should be relative to their peers from 30 years ago. We talked about that on a prior program where the latest calculation on that has them as much as 40% behind their peer group. And unfortunately, we constantly see and hear that message of if you don't have $500,000, then we don't want to talk to you. And that's throughout the financial services industry. Now, it's even getting to the point where that threshold is driving what actually is happening in the industry in terms of the compensation that advisors are paid. The latest to come out with this is a large bank. We're not going to name names on the program because we don't do that. But a large bank came out this past week and put out its compensation grid for its advisors and basically said that we're going to penalize you if you have accounts that have less than $250,000 in them. Well, again, how does that help? How does that help the young person or the folks that are just starting out to try and save money for retirement? If you can't access services that are available to others, how on earth is that fair? And when you look at the numbers and the statistics in terms of how much the percentages are in terms of how some of these generations are not doing very well at getting started for retirement. If you just think of like the Gen X's, which are generally folks that are born from like the mid 60s on up to the 80s. So that's the generation that is older than the millennials. The Gen Xers are in tough shape when you look at their overall retirement savings. Nearly half don't even have a retirement savings account. The millennials, in fact, which is the generation that follows the Gen Xers, the millennials are actually doing a little bit better than the Gen Xers are in terms of the overall ability to have started and to have saved for a retirement account. The problem is that we see in the financial services industry where more and more, if you don't have a big chunk of money, but here's the thing, wealth, unless you're lucky, unless you win the lottery, unless you're born into it, wealth is frankly achieved over time. It's not something that just all of a sudden magically falls out of the sky unless you win the lottery or you're born into it. For the rest of us, we've got to accumulate it over time. So this notion of only talk to somebody in the financial services industry, only talk and use the services of an expert, if you've got $500,000, it just seems quite silly when you stop and think about it, because the reality is that there are younger generations, millennials, Gen Xers, that most of them haven't, or nearly half of them haven't even started a retirement savings account. So our conversation and our message today is to talk to that group of people that are just getting started, and maybe they may be a little bit older, but the reality is you've got to start now. And so we're going to give you some things to be thinking about, particularly here at the end of the year, looking into next year. It's always a great time to make resolutions and what you can do differently. And we really want you to think about what you can do differently in terms of saving for retirement. These numbers are abysmal, and the financial services industry is doing a horrifically bad job at promoting the ability to save for retirement and actually helping people do what they need to do in order to save money for retirement. So one of the first key things that you should be doing to get started for your retirement is look at the options that are most likely already available to you. Chief among those is what your employer offers. Your employer probably offers some type of retirement plan, whether that's a 401k, 403b, 457 deferred comp, a simple IRA. The list goes on and on. There's a variety of options out there that employers offer. And what surprises me about the conversation when we talk about, okay, well, what does your employer offer? We often hear a couple of things that just kind of leave us scratching our heads. They may say, well, my employer doesn't match anything, so I'm not doing anything into that plan. This is about your retirement savings, and there's nothing simpler when it comes to an employer plan to set something up automatically for any amount of money, for low dollar amounts to just get started, because the reality is those small dollar amounts accumulated over time grow to bigger sums of money. So it is imperative that you don't use that excuse of, oh, my employer doesn't match, so I'm just not doing it because they don't feed it any money. Well, you can feed it money. And there's nothing more easier or more convenient than having that money taken out of your paycheck. This time of year is the time of year where typically people get bonuses, people get employee reviews. I know we just did that at our operation. And so what comes with that is usually some level of a salary bump or a salary increase. And so you need to take that increase in your paycheck and ultimately pretend it didn't happen and use that to put that money into your employer retirement plan. That's the easiest, most convenient, simplest, low dollar amount. It doesn't have to be big dollars, but the importance is to get started and to get started sooner rather than later. So that's one objection that we often hear. The other thing that we often hear is, well, I'm doing 4% because that's what my employer matches. Like, I'm not doing anything more in order to get the match. Well, wait a minute. Again, it's still your retirement. So what you really should be doing is doing as much as you can. And yes, certainly, the threshold that you at least want to do is to do enough into that employer plan to get the employer match. But folks, that's the minimum. That's not the maximum. That's the minimum. Don't use that to determine how much money you're going to put into a retirement savings account at work. Don't use that as the threshold. Use the better threshold, which is how much can I really afford to do? If I look at my budget carefully, if I look at the numbers, how much can I afford to do? The minimum you want to do is what the employer matches. But you've really got to go beyond that, particularly like most Gen Xers or millennials, you're having to play catch up. If you got half of that age group that doesn't even have a retirement savings account, that's a lot of catch up that they need to do. So rather than look at it from, oh, I'm just not bothering with my employer plan, or I'm only doing the match, really look at how much you can do. And in particular this time of year, when you get those salary bumps and you get those pay increases, just pretend they don't happen. Just take all of that and then correspondingly put that money into your employer plan. Now, if your employer does not have a plan available to you, then there are other options that are very simple to set up. An IRA, or depending upon your tax bracket, a Roth IRA. Those types of accounts can be set up for as little as $25 a month. So if your employer doesn't have a plan, the next thing you should be doing is saying, okay, let me get an IRA or a Roth, depending upon my tax bracket, and ultimately I'm going to start to save money. And those you can do for as little as $25 a month. You can find $25 a month. The point is that you need to get started, and just get started for any amount. because the reality is that you've got a lot to catch up, particularly those younger generations. These numbers that are coming out just are abysmal at best. And so, much like we said on a prior program of 3 or 4 weeks ago, millennials wake up and smell the coffee. It's also the Gen Xers wake up and smell the coffee, because nearly half of them don't have any type of retirement savings. So make sure that as you go into the new year that you take advantage of that and you don't use those tired excuses of, oh, my employer doesn't match, or oh, they only match to a certain level. Don't make it about that. Make it about as much as you can afford, putting a little away each and every paycheck. That, folks, is how you get to accumulate wealth over time. Sadly, the financial services industry as a whole is going more and more to a model where they are ignoring that group of people, and we think that is shameful. And at the end of the day, those people also need to be saving money and not just get the services if you've got $500,000. That's ridiculous. It's about time in and getting started, much more importantly than that. So make sure you're doing that, particularly as we go into a new year. Just a disturbing trend that has been going on for a number of years, sadly, in the financial services industry. We're going to slide to our break. When we get back, we'll continue the conversation here on Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning on News Radio WFLA Orlando.